What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 4 of our Story of Kingmaker series. Last we left off, we had just dealt with the Season of Bloom chapter, and typically speaking, after you wrap that up, there's some time in between the Ancient Curse timers, in which you can handle kingdom management. But obviously, these being story videos, we are going to skip right ahead to chapter 4, which is called Varnhold Vanishing. Now, roughly 2 months prior to the end of the Chapter 3 Ancient Curse, we will receive a noble at our court looking for his missing brother. This is technically not a required main quest, though it is classified with the Varnhold Vanishing quest, and is a bit of foreshadowing to people in Varnhold being missing. Closer to the timer being up, we will get a letter from Jamandi about Varnhold no longer sending correspondences, and you being right next to them, she asks you to go investigate, which we can do. Now, I do want to take this time to mention that if you did Varnhold's Lot, or if you have a save file for Varnhold's Lot, you will be prompted to import that save once Varnhold Vanishing starts. However, you won't be able to deal with the ramifications of your choices in that DLC until after this chapter is over. So the first thing we want to do is, of course, head straight to Varnhold. That said, the second we go to leave our capital for the first time after receiving that letter from Jamandi, we will be pulled into a meeting with the nymph where we can speak to her and basically explain that we know that she's been cursed due to our trip to the first world in Chapter 3. And then this meeting can kind of have some back and forth, and you get some dialogue and extra character development for her. Making our way to Varnhold. Once we arrive there, we find that the town is empty, but as we make our way to the fort of the city, we can find that there are Spriggans all over the place. And as we make our way to their leader, we might also see ravens watching us everywhere. Now, once we make it inside the main fort of Varnhold, we can speak to the chieftain of the Spriggans. Now, if you have some diplomacy skill, you can find out that these Spriggans were actually chased from their cave, and they came to Varnhold, which was already empty when they got there. You can kill the chieftain, spare him, get this information. It's possible to miss this information and have to look for the cave that we're going to next. But basically, the Spriggans were chased out of their cave by a group of humans and then came to Varnhold. So the next thing we can follow up on is going to that cave to see who kicked the Spriggans out. Now, on our way out of the fort, a raven will stop to speak to us. And it won't have much to say besides calling the people of Varnhold thieves, and then it just kind of runs off. Now this brings us to the Overgrown Cavern, which is where the Spriggans were from. I do want to point out this weird, dialogue inconsistency. When you're speaking to the Spriggans, they say they were kicked out of their cave to the north, though the Overgrown Cavern that is marked on your map when you pass the checks talking to the Spriggans is to the south of Varnhold. So I don't know if that's just a mistake in the dialogue or what, but we actually go to the Overgrown Cavern to the south, not the north. Now, we find the Overgrown Cavern full of barbarians. This chapter is where having Amiri in your party is actually pretty helpful. Because if you have Amiri in your party, she can just speak to the barbarians at the gate and they'll just let you in and you don't have to pass any checks. Now, they will explain that they are the Tiger Lord tribe if we actually take the time to talk to them. And we can ask about Varnhold. They will have no idea what happened. They were actually here looking for ruins or something because their leader, Dugoth, and the sisters have sent them out on this mission. You can ask Bolga, the leader of the barbarians in this cave, and she can kind of explain a few things. The sisters she mentioned are actually witches in service of Armag, the Tiger Lord's chieftain. And she can actually explain some things about their chieftain, Armag Twiceborn. Armag was once a warrior of old who supposedly was killed by Pharasma, the goddess of death herself, and according to Bolga here, has recently come back to life. But that is actually just foreshadowing, and we'll circle back around to that later. The main thing we get from Bolga is that the barbarians have a camp nearby, which is where we should head next, because she posits that the sisters might know something about Varnhold. Now, once we come up to the barbarian camp, we're going to get hit with a text event at first. If you have Amiri with you, you can pretty much automatically pass this, but you do get some dialogue regardless here. So during this text event, you might notice a defaced sister in the text event, and then after it, there will be an argument between Dugoth and the defaced sister that is in camp. So Dugoth will explain that he doesn't know what happened to Varnhold. The Tiger Lords are here helping the sisters look for whatever it is they're looking for, but they don't know exactly what it is, because the sisters won't tell them. And if you speak to the defaced sister, She will explain that her sisters are missing. There's actually 3 others here. That if you can find her 3 sisters, collectively they might be able to tell you kind of what happened to Varnhold. And she will also give you a special magic word of sorts that will open up Cyclops doors, because all of the ruins around here are from the ancient Cyclops Empire, which died out long before this game ever started. So our goal after we leave the camp is to find the other 3 defaced sisters, and now we have the word to open Cyclops doors that is going to allow us to do this. The defaced sister says that the word she gives us is actually the Cyclops word for darkness, as they are evil creatures. So apparently that was like a commonly used password for them or something. Now we have to find these defaced sisters to carry on. The easiest one to start with is to the south. It is the Forsaken Mound. This is purely a text event. If you pass it, you'll find out that the sister is dead, and you can actually use this text event to see the take off the mask that are covering the defaced sister's face. And this is where you find out that A, they literally don't have a face. So defaced is very a real thing to say. Moreover, you can note that they are Fae. They are not barbarians like the rest of the barbarians that are with the Tiger Lords here. But it's important to note that they're Fae, so you might not want to trust them up to this point. Now from here, we can head to the City of Hollow Eyes, which is actually to the north of the barbarians' camp. We can meet a barbarian Hilla here, who is helping the defaced sister that was sent here look for the artifact. But Hilla is mostly concerned with her barbarians at the moment, as they are fighting Cyclopses around the area. If you go and help some of these Cyclopses and tell Hilla afterwards what happened with the defaced sister, she'll give you some gold. But our main goal here is to find the defaced sister, which is in the tomb or barrow or whatever you want to call it, to the northern end of this map. Now once we get there, we can use the magic word to open the Cyclops door and enter the tomb to speak to the defaced sister. You can choose to kill this woman, or basically, free her now that she's not in imminent threat of dying to undead Cyclopses, and she will head back to the barbarian camp, which is what the other defaced sister in camp asked us to do. Now if you kill her, you get an incense burner, as well as an incense burner from the woman at the Forsaken Mound. Now this brings us to the Sepulchre of Forgotten Heroes, which is actually just a puzzle dungeon, which involves pressing a bunch of buttons, and some are timed, some aren't, and opening doors around this dungeon. It's probably my least favorite dungeon in the game, to be honest. But we can find that barbarians were led here by one of the defaced sisters, where they were ultimately mind-controlled by these undead Cyclopses here, and it would seem the defaced sister brought them here to die. So once we make our way to the defaced sister, after speaking to a dying barbarian who gave us this information, we can again choose to kill her or spare her. If you have Amiri with you still at this point, she will definitely want to kill this defaced sister for getting a bunch of barbarians killed. After this, we've found all 3 defaced sisters. We need to head back to the barbarian camp so we can go speak to the sisters, ideally, about what happened to Varnhold. It's worth mentioning that up to this point I actually recommended that you killed some of the defaced sisters, and the reason why is when you return to camp, all of the defaced sisters that are still alive, which is a maximum of 3, but potentially only 1, will essentially try to get Dugoth and his barbarians to kill you, saying that you are the reason all of their sisters are dead. Even if you didn't actually kill any of them, this will happen. Because as we've found while exploring it, these witches are actually Fae, and they're not really helping these barbarians any. They're essentially using the barbarians as fodder as they search for some artifact that is supposed to be nearby. If we killed some of the sisters, which is what Dugoth subtly hinted at that he wanted, we actually can pass a religion check during this conversation to basically say, aren't you guys tired of following these witches who are just getting you killed kind of stuff? It's not really what their god Gorum is all about. And you can potentially persuade about half the camp to help you, instead of following the witches in their attempt to kill you. So if you've killed all the witches up to this point, this is actually not all that difficult, because you can then persuade Dugoth to help you, and then you're only dealing with half the barbarians in the camp, as well as just 1 defaced sister. If you kept all of them alive, you don't seem to get the option to persuade Dugoth to help you, so you have to fight the entire camp plus the sisters. Also, you will run into Dugoth a little later in the next chapter if he lives. Now, regardless of how this pans out, after this fight is over, you'll get a chance to speak to Dugoth, potentially before he dies, and he'll explain that they actually already found the place that they believe the item the sisters were looking for is. Dugoth just didn't want to send his people there to what he figured would probably be death. So he'll mark it on your map for you. It's known as the Valley of the Dead. We could have gotten some incense burners up to this point. Otherwise, they are on the defaced sisters' bodies if they were all alive. You need to loot all three of these Cyclops incense burners off of their corpses, because we're going to need them in just a minute. But before we actually head to the Valley of the Dead, I want to talk about something. There is, as I mentioned a little earlier, a raven that has been following us around. You'll speak to him at various points throughout this little bit of exchanges, and he really doesn't have much to add. He's just in general being annoying, calling you thieves, saying he works for some master. If your name comes up, it cuts to the raven, and it flies off with your name. So I'm going to go ahead and spoil this a little bit before we actually get to the part where it's important. The raven is actually a soul eater. Soul eaters are stronger if they know your name. At first, I thought potentially, once I played through the game and saw that these were soul eaters, maybe if you withheld your name, you would be helping yourself out in the long run. That's not true. Actually, as it turns out, the raven will no matter what find out your name, which feels cheap. Because they clearly try to make it like you don't have to give it your name, or there's ways to hide your name, and there's just not. This raven will learn your name regardless. Because even if you do all of that hiding, when you go to the barbarian camp and the defaced sisters accuse you, they will say that they've learned your name, even if you've kept it hidden up to that point, and then the raven overhears this, which I think is just a cheap move, to be honest. Now, on our way to the Valley of the Dead, we will be stopped in a random event that is mandatory, meaning you can't evade it. So when you go into it, you will speak to the raven, where his master, who he names as Vordikai, formally invites you into his lair. Because apparently what the raven has been doing up to this point has been gathering information on the New World, because Vordikai has been long dead, much like the Cyclops Empire. It would seem he was awoken by something and has just been finding out information. So this is obviously our best lead as to what happened to Varnhold, and it's an evil undead Cyclops Lich, so we could probably investigate. Now right after this, if Tristan is not in our party, he will appear to us saying that he knows the Valley of the Dead as being a great place of evil, and he wishes to accompany you on your trip to the Valley of the Dead. So you can choose to take Tristan with you or not. Now, once we arrive at the Valley of the Dead, there will be a gate blocking our way. Now you can come here early and try to use the word that the defaced sisters give you to open this door, but it won't work. What you actually need to do is take the incense burners, hang them on the door, then speak the word, which will then open the Valley of the Dead door. And then we can make our way through the Valley of the Dead to Vordikai's tomb. Vordikai's tomb is a giant pain in the ass. So if you have not been paying attention to mechanics, this is where the game is going to punish you. Because even if you know what you're doing, this is a long dungeon, it can be a huge pain if you're just not prepared for it. And in my experience, is typically where most people who are new to Pathfinder and this game tend to fall off. This is a rough dungeon. So once you step into it and you talk to the raven, who will meet you at the door and ask him if you're ready to go in, he'll open the door for you, but he'll also close the exit, which means save scumming is pretty much your only options at this point. So you need to bring a lot of rations with you so you can rest, because you can't hunt in dungeons, as well as just generally be prepared for a long haul. This is a long dungeon. It's probably the first real challenge of the game. Now, as we make our way through this dungeon, we're going to speak to this raven several more times, where he'll ask the name of our companions, and even if we don't give it to him, for whatever reason, your companions pipe up and offer their names instead. Again, pointing out that you just cannot keep these guys from getting your names, which I think is annoying. Additionally, as we're making our way through this tomb, we will learn about an artifact called the Oculus of Abaddon, which it would seem is the relic that the defaced sisters were actually looking for here. And on the end portion of this first floor is where you'll run into the Soul Eaters I've mentioned. Now this is where the Soul Eater will pop up. It will speak the names of at least 3 of your companions, 2 plus yourself usually, and then you will go into a battle with those Soul Eaters. So what them knowing your name allows you to do means that if they speak your name, the only person that can fight the Soul Eater that spoke your name is you. So you can't use minions, you can't use anybody but yourself to fight the Soul Eater that said your name. There is no way around that. You just have to be strong enough to kill the thing, which isn't too difficult. They're just regular Soul Eaters as opposed to the more powerful variant of ancient Soul Eaters. But nonetheless, once the ones who shouted your name are dead, you'll then have a fight with 4 ancient Soul Eaters. And as you might see, the room right before this, I actually made a mistake against 2 of the giant Cyclopses that you can fight, and I got Amiri killed, so she'll be dead for the rest of this dungeon. But it doesn't really matter, as that fight with those Cyclopses is honestly the hardest fight in here. Now, on the second floor, we can encounter 2 things of note. One, we will have to fight a mage as we enter the second floor, called Cephal Laurentis. He is from Varnhold's lot, if you're wondering why there's just a random named enemy in here. He's from the DLC. And then we will eventually come across the ghost of none other than Wiles Gunderson, or Wiles Gunderson. I don't know how to say this guy's name, it's weird. If we chase his ghost down a hallway where we have to fight a ton of undead, we can eventually speak to him. And Wiles will explain that he is accidentally responsible for waking up Vordikai. As it would turn out, the nymph, who has been causing us much destruction, as we found out in Chapter 3, is actually not responsible for this, which means that what she told us at the beginning of this chapter, where she will say that she knows who's responsible for Varnhold vanishing, but it wasn't her, it turns out she was actually telling us the truth, because Wiles Gunderson stole a bracelet from Vordikai's tomb, which inadvertently woke him up. When Vordikai woke up, he needed to basically take stock of what the world was like now, so he sent Wiles and other people he found under his mind control using the Oculus of Abaddon, which is a dark artifact from the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, specifically Sharon. They rule an evil realm called Abaddon, hence the Oculus of Abaddon. So Vordikai, using the Oculus of Abaddon, sent Wiles to Varnhold, where he then followed and used Oculus of Abaddon, or at least its power, he didn't actually go there physically, it would seem, to mind control every single person in Varnhold and force them to make their way to Vordikai's tomb. This is where Vordikai used the Oculus's power to comb through all of these people's memories and stuff and just kind of acclimate himself to the world, which is in theory where a lot of these undead warriors we're fighting came from. Now after that, we'll actually be pretty close to Vordikai himself. There's just a couple more rooms in between Wiles and Vordikai. Now, ironically enough, once you get to Vordikai, we'll have that conversation. But I just want to mention that ironically, when you get to him, Vordikai is one of the easier fights in this dungeon. If you can get to Vordikai, you can kill Vordikai. Now, you can have a conversation with Vordikai at the start, but basically he's just aggressive, so the fight starts. Once you get Vordikai down to half health, if Tristan is not with you, he will teleport into the room, at which point he will steal Vordikai's eye, which is actually the Oculus of Abaddon, which Vordikai had to cut out his own eye to replace because the Oculus has to be put in someone's eye socket to be of use. So Tristan effectively betrays us by taking this artifact, and then he teleports away and leaves the party, if you had him in your party, and leaves your companions if he was in your companions, and seemingly betrayed you. Now, once this is done, we have to finish killing Vordikai. Again, not a very difficult thing to do. But once we get him down, here's where the options start popping up. So, if you are an evil character, it is possible to recruit Vordikai as an advisor. He actually will give you a little bit of information about a quest later on, which is about the only benefit of doing so. But just letting you know it's an option. You can recruit Vordikai as an advisor if you have an evil character. However, even if you are evil, I don't really recommend doing this, because if you do so, you have to sacrifice Magar Varn. And if you sacrifice Magar Varn, you don't get all the Varnhold's Lot DLC follow-up if you took Vordikai as an advisor, because all of the follow-up from your DLC choices hinges on Magar Varn coming and speaking to you after Varnhold vanishing. Do what you will there, just keep in mind if you want Vordikai as an advisor, it requires you to sacrifice Magar Varn's essence, thus making him unsavable. As Vordikai is dying, we can free Magar Varn's soul essence from a bottle nearby, which will pop Magar Varn back into existence. He'll be kind of disoriented, and we'll need to go into the next room, where it would seem the essence of all the rest of the souls of Varnhold are. and we can choose to take all of these back to capital and sell them, which is an evil thing to do, or we can set them free, which is what I recommend you do. Regardless of alignment, if you don't set these people free, you then have to repopulate Varnhold if you want to do anything with it kingdom management wise. Because right after you exit this and you go to exit the dungeon, you speak to Magar Varn, and he willingly allows your barony to annex his barony. So if you chose to bring all of the essence back to your capital and sell it, you will then have to spend a bunch of kingdom resources on repopulating Varnhold. So I honestly recommend you just save Magar, save all of his people, even if you're playing an evil character. You can actually, for the most part, avoid good choices while still getting to that outcome, so it's not necessarily like a counterintuitive roleplay thing to do either. But after this, we head to our capital and we wrap up Varnhold Vanishing, because now we know what happened to Varnhold, and we managed to save the day. That said, unlike the previous chapters, after you finish Varnhold Vanishing, you don't get the grace period normally, where you can wait until the next chapter starts. Regardless of how many days are left on the chapter or part 4 of the Ancient Curse, chapter 5 will start immediately, which is known as the Twice-Born Warlord, which I won't get into until the next video because that's the point of these videos. I just want to mention that unlike previous chapters, the next chapter starts immediately once you get back to your capital from defeating Vordikai, which isn't a huge deal. We will get to make up that lost time because the chapter after that starts at the same time regardless of when you finish up these two. It's just unusual because this one starts one right after the other. So there you go, guys. That is part 4 of our Pathfinder Kingmaker story series. I hope you guys are enjoying it. If you did, by all means, let me know down in the comment section below, or just leave a like on the video to help with that YouTube algorithm. But regardless, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.